Some people rock and some people roll. Some will make you giggle right down to your soul. So talk to the world and introduce them to you. And look at me now, I'm all Barbara and you. You gotta take a step inside the shoes of another. Get to know your neighbor, get to know one another. So talk to the world and introduce them to you. And look at me now, I'm on Barbara and you.
And welcome to our program. I'm Barbara Foster. And if you have watched me the past 3 weeks, I have been touting a wonderful book entitled Proof of Heaven. And I did have the privilege of interviewing the author of Proof of Heaven, Dr. Eben Alexander. And we are going to show my interview a little bit later, in about 30 minutes precisely. But I first wanted to have and thank the Healing Garden in Harvard, Mass. And I have their executive director, Margaret Koch, here with me. And Margaret, I do thank you for bringing Dr. Alexander to the area. It was a marvelous event that you had last week.
Thank you. We were delighted to have him come. There was a lot of interest in his book and his theory of, that there is a heaven. So,
And we will talk a little more about that after I find out a little bit more about you and the Healing Garden. And I didn't say the entire name. It's called the
Virginia Thurston Healing Garden.
Now, who is Virginia Thurston?
Ginny Thurston was a longtime resident in Harvard. She was an accomplished master gardener and a select woman and a philanthropist her whole life. She was diagnosed with late-stage cancer in 1996, and she died within 4 years of that diagnosis of her disease. And the Healing Garden was founded by her husband in memory of her and in honor of her and in the way that she lived her life so well, utilizing integrative services and her gardening, her landscape. There's 8 acres that were embedded in, that were her gardens.
Her husband, it started as a memorial to her?
It was in honor of her. He really believed that her approach to living with her cancer and living well while she had this cancer, expanding her life and finding comfort and relief from her treatments, was something that others should have access to as well. So he donated 2 acres of their 8 acres of land and a small cottage. And together with Ginny's psychotherapist, who ran the support group that Ginny had been in for years, Betsy Tyson Smith, Bill and Betsy co-founded the Healing Garden. And they started with this tiny cottage and a few staff people and a lot of volunteers.
And I first heard about you from a good friend of mine who is a cancer survivor, and she was just delighted with the services that you offer. Now, I don't want to assume that everyone in my viewing audience has heard about the Healing Garden, so tell us a little bit about what goes on there.
Sure. We're a cancer support center. Now we're out of the cottage. We've had an expanded renovation of that, so we're 3 to 4 times the size. The center offers multiple support groups. We have 8 thematically different support groups, everything from newly diagnosed, in treatment, post-treatment, metastatic groups, journaling support groups.
What was that term used?
Metastatic. So,
what is that?
People whose cancers have advanced beyond their primary site to distant areas in their body. So it's gone to their lungs or to their bones or to their brain. So they're, at a much more at-risk situation. So we do the support groups, we offer counseling, and we offer integrative therapies. Back in the day when Ginny first started, it was referred to as alternative therapies or complementary therapies. The science and the research and the evidence behind its efficacy has grown so that now the new terminology, especially in oncology, is treating patients in a holistic way, and it's called integrative medicine. So it's combining traditional medical approaches to trying to cure that cancer, but also approaching the other domains that are affected through a cancer diagnosis. So we know that there's distress psychologically, socially, physically, and spiritually. And so approaching all of that while a person's in treatment or post-treatment or even at end of life are important things to put them so that they have less suffering, less side effects, less stress in their life. And it's actually cost effective because the more that we can control people's anxiety and depression, their pain, they're less likely to go back to the medical institutions and go back to the ER for emergency care, go back and get hospitalized because things have gotten out of control. We also provide workshops and educational programs. A lot of cancer care is done in the ambulatory setting, so you go, it's day, you know, you go in, you sit in a chair, you have your chemo infusion, and you go back home. So a lot of what people need support in is how to cope with, they're not medical professionals in the home, and so when they're having side effects to their therapies, when they're having situations come up, the caregivers in the home need to be educated as well. And they do get a lot of support from these ambulatory cancer centers, but we're another layer on top of that to help all the people involved with a person that has cancer. So their sister, their mother, their children, who really are going on this journey with them. We provide programming and support for them as well.
So as far as the patients themselves, you kind of said there could be at many phases within their treatment or be post-treatment, but do you get referrals from the medical field?
Absolutely. So we make sure that our services are known to all of the treatment facilities in Massachusetts, really. All of the downtown Boston academic centers and all of the community hospitals. One of the wonderful things about the Healing Garden is it's in Harvard, and we're in this 8 acres of gorgeous woodland. It's serene, it feels like a retreat center. One of the bad things is that we're in Harvard and we're not a drive-by, so it's really, you know, word of mouth is so important, and clients have very positive experiences and they share that, so we get a lot of referrals. People come because friends have been there or they've heard about someone that's been there, and so they find their way to us at some point when they're ready for or in need of some help in this cancer journey.
But it's not a residential home.
It is not.
It's not an overnight or anything.
No, we have a facility where we have treatment rooms, so people can go in and have appointments for oncology massage or acupuncture or shiatsu or meditation or hypnosis, you know, if they're fearful of going under sedation for surgery. There's all kinds of work. We have 35 affiliated therapists that are credentialed and have specialty in various modalities of integrative medicine, integrative care. They also contribute to providing the content and the leadership for the programs or workshops that we do. And this is all offered either for free or at a very low cost. And it's always been part of Bill and Betsy's mission to provide this without barriers, so that if there are clients that come to us who, you know, can't even afford the smallest fee for something, we do fundraising and have the ability to do what we call fund a need. And so it's really support for those folks so that we reimburse a provider at the lowest end of their sliding scale. So for example, they may want to partake in some form of individualized therapy. They can't afford it. The therapist then will accept the bottom of the scale and will use Fund a Need to provide that. So the clients are not limited in any way.
That is wonderful, because it's not insurance covered.
It's not. The counseling is, if you have insurance, we connect you to a provider that will do individual or family or couples counseling that accepts your insurance. But for massage and acupuncture, any of the other things, those are not reimbursed by insurance. So we do a tremendous amount of fundraising. We don't get any government support. It's all through individual donors, some small fundraising events, grants, family foundations, and very, very generous public support. So, for example, when we were given the facility and the land and access to Ginny's garden, we renovated the building, but we wanted to create an active horticultural space in the back of the building where people would be immersed in nature and cross-pollinate therapies. So we would take an art class outside and paint from the actual gardens, or harvest plant materials from the sensory garden where there's scented materials or edibles, and you might go in and make a natural soap that is more comfortable for your body because you might be sensitive from your radiation therapy. Or you could use the harvested materials and do a paper making class, and then take the paper and make a journal, and then take the journal and go to the journaling support group and do your therapy and journaling, all through incorporating all the different modalities of expressive arts, of partaking in nature, of the talk therapy, or the whatever kinds of therapy groups we have.
Now, I believe you said that you started with, it started pretty much with volunteers. And what year did it begin? 90?
They opened the doors in May of 2001.
2001.
Founded in 2000. They took a little bit to get organized and put the programs together.
And when
May
did you
1st.
become executive director?
I was on the board for a number of years. I come from the Cancer Center over in Concord. And after a number of years, I started about a year ago as executive director.
And do you have a large staff, or
Do
all these
not.
all these therapists? It's per appointment. They get paid per appointment.
So we have, if you've rolled us all together, we have 2.5 staff.
Oh my
I'm full-time,
goodness.
nobody else is.
Wow.
We have a care coordinator who's the face of the Healing Garden and welcomes new clients and gets them scheduled. We have a director of wellness and integrative care. She's this remarkable social worker. She's a master's in social work and also has a master's in theology. And she has these 35 therapists who are affiliated with us. They're not on staff, they're not paid, but they've been vetted by us, and they work together with us and offer a tremendous amount of pro bono work to then provide services to the client. So we'll pair clients after we've done an intake with them. We'll assess how we might be able to address their needs and make suggestions, and then refer them to any one of these 35 therapists, or some of our programs, or our workshops, or the support group. Everybody's different in what is helpful and what they'd like to try.
The scheduling must be a nightmare.
It is. It is. And then we have lots of volunteers, and so, we may call someone and say, could you come clean the fish pond, or, can you do some data entry for us? Or, we self-teach ourselves on a lot of things. We, sometimes need graphic design help, and we'll call students at the local school to see if maybe one of them can help us. And we get, yes, we'd love to come help.
Are you always looking for volunteers?
We are, constantly.
So we can put a plea out?
We can put a plea out. We have, all of the grounds are managed for all of the gardens, and they're gorgeous. And it is open to the public to come and walk the grounds.
Oh, that was one of my questions.
Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. We're closed for client care on Fridays, and we ask the public to observe a break on the weekend, because there is a private residence that the Thurstons used to live in, that there are homeowners that are there. But the gardens around our building that we use in our therapy setting is all maintained by our healing gardeners. And so they are both master gardeners or just novice gardeners, but they love the work that we do. They love our mission. And so they come and they do small projects, or they'll open the garden in the spring and do the cleanup and the setup and burn the brush. And they then have a potluck and they celebrate together and enjoy companionship. And the clients are grateful for all of that.
This time of the year in November, it's going to be, I would assume,
We just had our fall cleanup on the 2nd.
You won't have as much activity in the garden.
Well, you'd be surprised. They've thoughtfully planned this healing garden so that at any season there's interesting things going on.
That's wonderful.
And we just actually had a bear there this
Ooh.
week. But the birds, and it's just an amazing environment, and it attracts a lot of activity and a lot of people coming just to see what it is that we do, and they kind of, we call it, they fall in love. they feel the magic. There's a lot of gifting and generosity, and so it's an attractive place for people to come spend time.
And you don't need to make a reservation or buy a ticket. You can just come
Just
and walk
come.
the grounds.
Just come.
Anytime, Mondays through Thursdays, 9 to 5. I'm going to keep a note on
Come.
that. That's very interesting. Now, I believe when I was at the event that I heard you mention that the people who utilize the facility might have any form of cancer, might be a wide age range.
That's
There's
right.
no stereotype.
Correct.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. It was originally founded by Bill in honor of Ginny for women with breast cancer. And for a number of years that was happening. And often there would be requests, is there some other place to go? I have ovarian cancer, or I have lung cancer, and there was no other facility like this. There is no other facility that's freestanding. It is not part of a hospital. It's not connected to a hospital. It's very much, it's unique. And so as a board, we decided that we really had the expertise and the programming, and it was effective. We knew it, we had demonstrated it for years, that it was something that we should make available to everyone. So in 2012, we opened it up to all people facing cancer, regardless of gender, diagnosis, or financial limitations. And so it's been wonderful. We have men now who are there. We were curious whether it would be a place that would be an attractive approach to cancer support, and it definitely resonates with people. It's a very challenging disease, and it's a chronic disease. It's considered a chronic disease.
And all the varieties are very different. I do know a lot of breast cancer survivors, and we've actually done a show about ovarian cancer because it's so often misdiagnosed or overlooked. And another friend of mine who does have ovarian cancer and is undergoing treatment now, just said, you know, breast cancer gets all the notoriety, and people are more empathetic, sympathetic about breast cancer and forget about the other types.
Right.
That's not the case with the Healing Garden.
It's not. You know, there is a lot of media attention to it, and I do think that some of the other groups, you know, are underserved, and that was the reason why the board decided that there was no good reason to keep these populations separate. We're not a medical facility, and so we don't have to have expertise in any particular kind of cancer. We have the resources to connect people to and help them navigate those medical systems. That's our expertise, and we have the resources to help people navigate their life experience while they are coping with this. And there's a lot of similarities regardless of what your cancer is. It's frightening. It's financially debilitating often. There are ripple effects that happen in families when someone's diagnosed. Their ability to work, to stay employed. They have, you know, mounting medical bills that affects everything. It trickles down into their lives. And then, of course, you know, there are folks who are treated and it's successful and they go on, but they're in the survivorship state of their life, and they sort of lose contact with those medical teams because they're not as necessary, and they don't feel held in this experience, and so they're still looking for that community of support. And that's the other thing that's really remarkable about the Healing Garden is it creates, and with opening it to everyone, there really are friends and friendships that are found there, and they connect each other with information that they've learned and resources that they've found. It's like a clearinghouse of, you know, great information that they bring to each other as they develop these relationships with each other there.
And on a typical day, how many people might be taking advantage of the facility, using all that you offer?
It varies. There are days when all of our rooms are full and things are going on. We'll have a support group with 10 people and a Tai Chi class with 10 people going on, and both body rooms are rotating with our appointments going in and out, and other days where it's quiet. I would say that we have more capacity to take on more people. It's a matter of us becoming known. And I think, as we move along, it's getting more common for people to be familiar with what these modalities of care are. 12 years ago when we started, not very many people would participate in shiatsu or do a oneness blessing. Those are becoming more commonly understood, and things that people in the community are learning about and exploring.
And you mentioned being on the board of directors, so the organization is governed by a board of directors.
It is.
And is that made up, I'm not going to ask you to name names, but there are boards of directors that are 6 people and there are boards of directors that are 36 people.
Right.
How large is your board approximately?
The board is now 9, and we are actively looking for people who are interested in joining the board.
Okay.
We have members that have been part of the organization on the board since it began. They continue on. A prior board chair held her position for a number of 3-year terms and now sits on the board and will continue on. There's an amazing amount of dedication to that. We also have a development committee. Some of our board members work on the development committee, but we also have then community members who are on that development committee as well. And we're always looking for people interested in either of those two. We would like to expand both because, fundraising and stewardship of this is really important. It's a very unique, we don't have an endowment, we don't have, a savings bank.
Right.
It's year to year, trying to make it to the budget to the end of the year. So the more people that we can get interested in it, the better off that this organization will be, and it will be sustainable for the future.
So if some of our viewers tonight are hearing you and then you've piqued their interest, they might want to just volunteer for a few hours a week doing something helpful, or they might want to actually be on your board of directors, what do they do?
They can reach out and contact me. We have a website. It's www.healinggarden.net, and I'm reachable at Margaret@healinggarden.net. So we're happy to.
And are you in the phone book?
I believe we are.
I think you are.
I believe we
or
are.
I know I found you on the website. There's the website. It's just thehealinggarden.net?
Not even it's www.healinggarden.net.
Okay. And I will attest that you are very approachable because when I began inquiring whether or not I could get an interview with Dr. Eben Alexander, obviously first I wanted the permission of the Healing Garden, and it all went very, very smoothly. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
In a few minutes, if you can succinctly tell me a little bit about your background and why you got involved on the board of directors. I don't think there's a family that hasn't been touched by cancer, and I didn't know if there was any personal motivation. Would you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. There is not currently in my immediate family a connection with cancer, although not very many families can say that, and I don't know how much longer I can. But my early career after college, I started in cancer research for the Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group. It was a national clinical trials research group running phase 3 research studies on best modes of care for all types of cancer. It was a very large group, and we were part of Harvard School of Public Health as the statistical center that did the analysis of those trials, doing best therapy against new and upcoming suggested therapies. I did that for a number of years and then went to Chicago and worked for the American College of Surgeons. The American College of Surgeons accredits cancer centers. So I did that for a short amount of time, and then I took time off and raised a family. I have 3 beautiful daughters, and I was speaking with a friend of mine who said, what would you like to be doing now that you don't need to be mothering as much? And I said, I loved being in oncology. And she said, then you should go back. And I said, oh, I can't. It's been too many years. But she pushed me to, and so I made an inquiry at the hospital, and I ended up at the cancer center. doing first research, because the hospitals, community hospitals, do offer clinical trials. And so I was put in place to do that, and then in a short amount of time became an administrator for the Cancer Center. And so I was a liaison to the Healing Garden. They asked me if I would join and help counsel them and advise them about their programming and their strategy and what were the needs of cancer patients. And I loved that time. Being there at the Cancer Center and connected to the Healing Garden. And so it was a natural fit to have seen, both sides of the organization. I saw it as a person who wanted to refer my patients there, and then as a board member understanding the needs of the organization and how important it was to keep it sustainable and there as a resource in our communities. So
you're certainly
I was delighted. I was delighted to be given the opportunity, and I've never worked, in such a tiny nonprofit. It's certainly challenging, but it is so rewarding, and there is so much generosity around this center that it's a pleasure.
And you've a couple of times mentioned fundraising, and of course, bringing Dr. Eben Alexander was a fundraiser. But wow, what a great event it was, and it enlightened so many people.
Yeah.
And for those of you who may not have heard my pitch for their event and the book, Dr. Alexander still is a neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience. And that's pretty much all I'm going to tell you, because you should read the book. But wasn't he amazing?
He was. I should give credit to one of our therapists was the brainchild behind this. She had read his book, and she had seen him speak, and so she helped to bring him and thought of this Marilyn Strong, right?
Okay.
She's a Reiki master, and very much interested in the metaphysical world and what could that be and how do we think about that. And so she thought his book was quite provocative and people would like to hear about it, and so she thought of this fundraiser to benefit the Healing Garden, because that's near and dear to her heart as well. So that's how we got him to come, and he was charming, very accessible and approachable, and warm, and shared his story and listened to people and was curious about what they wanted to know.
I was very impressed with him being as accessible as he is, because this man, the book's been on the New York Times bestsellers list over a year. He's been on Oprah, he's been on Dr. Oz, and he's on the Barbara News show. I'm so excited. And we're going to be playing that for you in just a few minutes, but when we, before we do, in 30 seconds or so, Margaret, is there any conclusive comments you'd like to make? Something you might want people to know about the Healing Garden that maybe I haven't given you an opportunity to say?
No, it's a wonderful place. I hope that anyone who's curious about it will come and visit us, and that if you know someone that needs cancer support, we're there. We're there to help people live well. The tagline is, you are a person, not a disease, and you can live well.
Well, God bless you for the work you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And now we're going to be treating all of you to meeting Dr. Alexander, at least from my interview with him, which was positively delightful and very, very educational. So stay tuned. That's coming up next. And that's it I'm going to switch right over to that. Okay. This is Barbara Foster, and we are very excited about tonight's interview with Dr. Eben Alexander. But I also, before I introduce you to Dr. Alexander, want to thank the Healing Garden in Harvard for bringing him to town. And we are at the lovely Bromfield School, who's provided this great background for us. And I have just heard Dr. Alexander speak for, I believe it was a little over an hour, and it was so quiet in that auditorium you could have heard a pin drop. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Anyone who knows me or watches my show with any regularity has heard me mention the book, Proof of Heaven. If you haven't read it, read it. I hardly know where to start, but one thing that surprised me a little bit tonight in hearing you speak was your concentration on letting us know that you were talking a little bit, kind of a lot, about science versus, I'm going to use the term religion, and how you came from a somewhat religious background, became an agnostic, and now you're a believer. That is quite a journey. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think a tremendous part of my message is that science and spirituality strengthen each other. And it's very confusing and illusory to think that they're in conflict. And the thing to understand is that our modern conventional science, what's called reductive materialist science, it says if you reduce everything down to electrons, protons, quarks, atoms, molecules, cells of the brain, and all the material world, and understand physics, chemistry, and biology, that you can explain everything that is. And the problem is that conventional science, which I bought into completely for more than half a century before my coma, is false. It cannot offer up the first sentence to tell you about consciousness and about how consciousness might emerge from the brain. And that is a huge part of the lesson here, is that as our world awakens and we come to a much richer understanding of who we are and what this is all about and where we're going, it does involve realizing that our current level of conventional science, that is just what I described a minute ago, is woefully inadequate. It's a kindergarten level thinking that has nothing at all to say about consciousness, much less the phenomena of what's called non-local consciousness.
And I did not mention that you are a well-renowned neurosurgeon, and I don't want to assume that everyone in our audience knows anything about your story. And obviously we're trying to condense things here, but you mentioned your coma.
Right.
And you are somewhat of a medical miracle, aren't you? And if you could just kind of keep it in layman's terms.
Right. Well, I think the important thing about my story and my journey has to do with the fact that I had severe bacterial meningitis that by all rights should have killed me. And in fact, my doctors tell you to this day they have no idea how I had a complete recovery from that illness. It turned out to be a very rare bacterial meningitis, E. coli, which is less than 1 in 10 million per year. And when I went into coma rapidly within hours and got to the emergency room with that diagnosis, I was already down to a 10% chance of survival or less. And that only got worse during the week. I went right into coma, was put on a ventilator, was put on 3 very powerful antibiotics, and as the week wore on, I got down to where I had a 2% chance of survival and no chance of recovery. And that's the part that my doctors would tell you to this day is a medical miracle without explanation. And of course, for me, it just helped to keep me very focused on trying to understand what had happened. And that same neuroscience that I mentioned a few minutes ago, the conventional idea that the brain creates consciousness, that it's all birth to death and nothing more, in fact, would tell you that somebody as sick as I was with that disease, bacterial meningitis, should have had no experience whatsoever. No dream, no hallucination, no confabulation, nothing, because those parts of my brain were wrecked. There was nothing left of them to have such an experience. And that's why my story has garnered such attention, not only among average readers around the country and around the world, but also among the scientific and medical communities. And that's why I'm being asked to give talks at various medical schools and surgical groups, because this is all about a world-changing paradigm, and explaining this and realizing that my story takes the lid off of so many other thousands of near-death experiences and of the afterlife literature and writings of religious mystics and prophets for thousands of years. It's all about a realm that's absolutely real and is the eternal dwelling place of our souls.
And I understand that you were actually beginning to go around and speak about your near-death experience before you wrote the book Proof of Heaven. And I congratulate you because this has been on the New York Times bestsellers list for over a year now, I believe.
Well, that to me was a big surprise. It came out the first week, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's pretty much stayed #1 the whole year. I knew it would be a very powerful and paradigm-shifting book as I was working on it. As soon as it took me months to realize what my coma journey was really telling me, but once I realized, I knew the story and potentially the book that I ended up converging on 3 years later would be a world changer, a game changer. But I thought it would take a long time to do that. So I was kind of shocked that the first week it came out, it pegged right up at #1 and it stayed there the whole time. It's now scheduled for publication in more than 43 countries. So it's not just a North American phenomenon, this is a global phenomenon.
Well, you are certainly have become very popular. We had quite a crowd here to hear you speak today. And yet at the same time, you alluded to the fact that there are some critics out there. I'm sure it's no surprise to you that there are some critics. And I would think you're very understanding of that, because the way you used to feel about people who thought they had near-death experiences, and now you've crossed over now that you've had one yourself.
Right. Well, it turns out that I never paid any attention to the near-death literature before my coma. I believed fully in conventional neuroscience and reductive materialist science that the brain creates consciousness. I believed that the only way we can know anything is through our physical senses. And of course what I realize now is I was absolutely wrong on all of those counts. Non-local consciousness, things like telepathy, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, past life memories in children, all the phenomena of near-death experiences, deathbed visitations, after-death communications, all those things have a basis in reality. And that is the thing that is so shocking. For the scientists out there who doubt that and who need more proof, I urge them to go read the book Irreducible Mind Toward a Psychology for the 21st Century by Ed Kelly, Emily Kelly, Bruce Grayson, Crabtree, Gauld, and others at the University of Virginia. 800 pages of hardcore scientific data and analysis that shows that non-local consciousness is absolutely real. And there are those out there, the critics that you mentioned. In fact, in writing this book, I was my own worst critic and skeptic for a long time, as was my older son, Eben Alexander IV, majoring in neuroscience as a junior in college at the time that all this happened. And he was also very openly minded, critical, and skeptical. And I invite true open-minded skepticism. And those skeptics have been very helpful in formulating this book, because they were the ones who helped me to dig deeply in trying to explain this. First, explain it as a brain-based phenomenon, but we came to realize, given all the facts, that there's no way it happened in my brain, that it absolutely happened. It happened in a realm outside of the physical realm and did not happen in my brain at all. There's some tremendous clues here about the nature of consciousness. And I'll tell you now, it's very clear to me, and what this book is proof of and my story is proof of, as are so many other similar accounts, that the brain does not create consciousness. That's a great misunderstanding. It gets right at the hard problem of consciousness, that very problem, that there's not a scientist on earth who can give you the first sentence about how the physical brain might create consciousness. Put that out there. There is not a scientist who will come up and give us that sentence, because it doesn't exist. It's that great white elephant in the world of modern conventional science that they don't admit to. And given that the only thing that any one of us truly knows exists is our own consciousness, I would say that is a glaring problem to have, especially if you have theories of everything out there, which our modern world of physics and cosmology keeps getting tempted into saying they have. Very important to understand that I went through a lot of this as my own deepest critic and skeptic. And I would say that there are a lot of scientists out there, a lot of doctors, physicists, who totally get this. They know where this is going. And it's really only bad news for the pseudoscientists and pseudo-skeptics who are addicted to scientific materialism, because they might have thought they were close to a theory of everything, but they now have to realize they're back in kindergarten. They have to do a whole lot more work, and in fact, the human brain and mind will never have a complete understanding of the workings of this universe.
It's not easy for anyone to admit they were wrong. You were steeped in academics, and we know that what happened to you had to be so dramatic that it was easy to say, I was wrong.
Well, I must say that as I came to realize what had happened to me deep in coma, initially the coma experience itself, the near-death experience, was very, very powerful and life-changing. But the real change came a few months later as I started to put it together and to understand just how sick I was, and that my attempts at a brain-based mechanism absolutely failed. And that's when I really started to glimpse the power of the story and what it was telling us about the nature of our existence. And I had to question everything I ever had accepted and thought I knew as a fact. And so in that sense, yes, I had to come away from it and say, yes, I was wrong. But in fact, the reality here is we're all here learning lessons. And I think that most of us are seeking truth and trying to get to the nature of our existence and uncover all that. And in that sense, I think I had to go through that period of relative ignorance and of lack of understanding to get to some of the heights of my understanding now. And this is a process, I'll tell you, near-death experience, those who study near-death experiences will tell you I'm still very early on in this. I know I'll spend decades and decades trying to get deeper and deeper into the levels of this. That's why I do a lot of meditation now. I work, as I mentioned tonight, I work with Karen Newell and Kevin Cossie of Sacred Acoustics. Those who are interested should go to sacredacoustics.com. But this is all about using sound to get into deep meditative states. And people can go to that site, sacredacoustics.com, or go to lifebeyonddeath.net, my website, or to Eternia, eternea.org, to learn a lot more about that, about frontier science and about meditation, and about how science and spirituality are coming together.
I heard you mention tonight the great respect you had for your father, who was also a neurosurgeon and was also a man of strong faith. Do you see a connection between where you were, how you were brought up, and where you are now? Do you feel that your dad's early faith, or that you would remember, had an influence and that helped you get where you are now, along with the near-death experience?
Well, I think my dad's very strong faith and his very strong scientific beliefs were helpful. I obviously had to go on a somewhat circuitous pathway to get to where I am now. But yes, I believe that my father's influence has been far greater than I ever recognized while he was alive. And that his very open-mindedness and willingness to really question everything and get to deeper answers, his true, honest, open skepticism, was a huge part of my own growth that I only came to appreciate and utilize after my coma in trying to sort it out and understand what had happened to me and what it meant.
And during the coma, in your near-death experience, you said you were kind of surprised that after looking back at what happened, that you didn't see your dad, who was deceased. You thought you might have been recognizing certain people. Do you believe that today your dad knows what you're doing?
I would tell you that my belief is with quite a bit of certainty that he knows exactly what I'm doing.
And he's
that
very
he fully
proud of you.
approves of it. Well, I think he actually was part of the whole unfolding of this journey. A very big part of it.
And I think I detect that you also believe that you were brought back to this earth for a purpose, a very specific purpose.
Well, I
or
will
maybe
tell you,
more than one.
It took me well more than 2 years to even begin to admit that that might be true. I've started all of this, trying to write it all down and understand my journey, my doctors having told me you cannot have experienced anything, and all at a time when my brain had been so damaged and changed by the meningitis that I remembered nothing of my life before, of knowing of brain, mind, consciousness, 20 years experience in neurosurgery. All that stuff took up to 8 weeks to come back after the coma. And so early on, as I would try and tell my doctors about some of the experience deep in coma, they would tell me, well, you were too sick to experience anything. Your neocortex was being wrecked. And according to all of our knowing of neuroscience and meningitis and neocortex, I should not have experienced anything at all. That's why this story has taken the scientific and medical communities by storm, because of the power of it as a key that unlocks that so many of these near-death experiences have a basis in absolute fact and reality. We need to take them seriously. They're not just hallucinations or dreams or tricks of the dying brain at all. And so that's a huge part of the awakening that I've gone through.
You mentioned you use a lot of quotes in your book, and I was taken by the one from Einstein on page 162 of your book. I must be willing to give up what I am in order to become what I will be. What have you given up?
Well, I would say I've given up my simplistic addiction to materialist science, to thinking that science that says it's all just subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, cells of the brain, that there's no such thing as consciousness, no such thing as soul or spirit. That thinking is woefully inadequate, primitive, it doesn't work. It's too simplistic. And so now I've given that up in favor of knowing that our life, our existence, all of us here together, all of life on earth and life beyond this earth, all of consciousness throughout the universe, serves a far grander purpose than anything I ever knew before. Knowing that we come in these incarnations and come back again and again with our soulmates, soul groups, in learning the lessons we're here to learn that have everything to do with manifesting that unconditional love of the Creator for the creation, showing love, compassion, forgiveness, and coming to appreciate that infinite unconditional love has power to heal beyond our wildest dreams. And that is an important lesson to take home. So my work as a healer has changed completely. I see now that disease, illness, all the hardships in life often are opportunities for growth of our souls and that ascendance, coming to show that compassion and forgiveness and that understanding and acceptance in ways that can help us become much more full as these eternal spirits that we are.
I think most people have some sort of fear. Death is high on the list of fears, and surprisingly to people like you and me, a lot of people fear public speaking. We don't have a problem with that. And you always, from what I've read in the book, always seem to be somewhat fearless, jumping out of airplanes and operating on brains. Is there anything that you fear now?
No, I would say there's nothing that I fear. I realize there are lessons in all that we do here. As I often say, that old saying, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, goes a lot further down the pathway of explaining things than I ever knew before. And so much of the badness in this world, in the material realm, has to do with fear. And fear, say fear of death, or fear of not having abundance, fear that we're limited in this birth to death material world with nothing more to our existence. That's all unfounded. And that is, it's tremendous by knowing that we are infinitely loved by a force, by a creative source that has far grander power than we could ever imagine in all manifestation of this universe. And we are deeply loved, and we deserve that love of that being. And that allows us to be fearless and to go through all of our existence in this material realm as well as into those spiritual realms, knowing full well that we do have nothing to fear, that we will be taken care of.
You use the word love a lot. Do you treat mankind in general differently now than you did before your illness and your coma?
Yes, I would say I have a completely different view of mankind and of each and every one of us individually, knowing that we are each eternal spiritual beings, that we're here to learn these lessons. We choose these hardships and difficulties in our lives as opportunities for growth of our souls. This is all about that God loving us so much as to give us the gift of free will, in spite of the fact that that free will allows for so much of the pain and suffering. The free will that allows us to make choices that hurt other beings, that hurt this environment. That free will can be very damaging, and yet God loves us so much as to allow us to have that free will. Free will allows us to forget that we are infinitely loved by that divine all-powerful. And choosing to forget that can allow tremendous pain and suffering into our own lives. Whereas we also have the choice to remember that divine connection. And that's a huge part of the message of my book. The analogy I make between my own adoption story and having been left behind by my mother when I was an infant how that always kind of shaded me and made me question my own lovability.
I'm smiling because I wasn't going to do the spoilers. I was going to make them go out and get the book, because there are two real surprises in the book. And you being adopted was, when I got to that part, I'm like, oh my goodness, what a shock.
Yes, well, it's a huge part of the understanding. As I often say, those who have read the book will know it's a tremendous part of my understanding of this. But I use that analogy because it's very important. I would say any of us, if we buy into that birth to death myth, the smoke and mirrors that says brain creates consciousness, when the brain and body die, that's the end. That is wrong. It is absolutely false, and that is a crucial part of this. But if we choose to believe that and forget our connection to the divine, that we are eternal souls that are deeply loved by God with infinite power, then that choice allows us to live in that misery of the bleakness of that birth to death and nothing more kind of existence. And that's why we have the choice to believe otherwise and to come to see the evidence that we are eternal spiritual beings. But that is a huge part of the lesson of my story and my journey.
How has your experience and your journey and your publicity, being a public figure now, how has that affected your family? You seem to have a very close-knit family unit.
Well, I can say that it has had tremendous impact on all of us. We've all grown by this, not just my immediate family, but also my extended adoptive and birth families, and far beyond that, friends and so many others who know me have been completely transformed by this experience. I mean, it's impossible not to be. And that is a huge part of it. My sons, in particular, Eben the Fourth, who is now 25, and my younger son, Bond, who is now 15, have grown in ways that I never could have possibly predicted. Their knowing of consciousness, of the deep mystery of consciousness, that death is not the end. Their understanding of all this is very profound. And likewise for so many other people who know me well.
And I want to give you a chance, too, to tell people how to get the book. It's everywhere, though, isn't it? Barnes & Noble, online, you can...
Yeah, the book is out there everywhere. And I would say that there is now an anniversary edition, anniversary deluxe edition, that has 32 additional pages in it. So people can look for that one. There's also Seeking Heaven, which is an audiobook that has a lot of the meditations that I have developed with Karen Newell and Kevin Cossie of Sacred Acoustics. And people can also get those meditations by going directly to sacredacoustics.com. And these are the tools that we're bringing to the world to help change this world. Those kind of meditations, so much of my understanding of this is about the deep mystery of consciousness, and also that the answer lies within us all. You don't have to die or almost die to get this. Deep meditation, centering prayer, what have you, and that's why we offer these tools, is to help people get into deep meditative states. For me, that deep meditation with Sacred Acoustics kind of sound enhancement is a form of centering prayer. It's all around an all-loving, infinitely powerful God. But it's available to all of us, and that's why I would encourage people to go there to learn more about this deep meditation and to open up their beliefs to knowing the reality of eternity of their soul.
Are you still practicing medicine?
I'm very old school, which means if I operate on you, I need to be there 24/7 to take care of you. This has not left time for that. So as of about May of 2012, I've stopped seeing patients. You know, I still cherish all the time I spent in working with patients and taking care of people, but I realize that this is a way to give more to this world than I was able to give before.
And that's part of the reason you feel that you were brought back to this world?
Well, it took me many years to admit that, but yes, I think this all happened for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all here for a reason. We all have a purpose, and this just so happens to be my purpose.
Well, and we certainly appreciate you coming here because you live in Virginia.
I do.
And I don't think I mentioned the Healing Garden, but in case people don't know, the Healing Garden is located here in Harvard, Mass. And it is a supportive cancer care facility for people having any type of cancer at any age. And obviously you must have known about them and believed in what they're doing to want to come here.
Yes, they are doing wonderful work, and so much of the lessons that I've gained from all this, they have to do with healing. That unconditional love has infinite power to heal. And I think Western medicine is beginning to really grow in the way that it accepts the power of prayer and so much more about recognizing the eternity of our souls and the lessons we're here to learn and how that plays such an important role in our healing. And that's the place that Healing Garden is a beautiful example of how that all works.
Well, and you are a beautiful example and touched many lives today as you spoke to a full auditorium here. And we're going to save that other spoiler for people to read about in the book,
Right.
about your special angel in heaven.
Right.
Is there any one quick thing you want people to know that you can say in about 30 seconds?
I think the most important thing to point out is that each and every one of us are infinitely loved by a power far greater than we can imagine. And we're deserving of that love, and that all we have to do is serve as conduits to share that unconditional love, compassion, and forgiveness, taking care of our fellow souls and taking care of this planet, and it's all going to be fine. It'll all be well.
And if you want to hear more about that, read the book, Proof of Heaven by Dr. Eben Alexander. Thanks again. It was wonderful to meet you and hear you speak.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I
My
appreciate it.
pleasure.